That's what causes a lot of people to think that when they're getting depth in the later rounds, they're always thinking, give me a guy that's going to get me 3 or 4 receptions and 40 to 50 yards, which is approximately 7 to 9 fantasy points in a PPR league, which if you play PPR, that's not so great. But in theory, if you back this type of mentality, you have to think if you have any injuries, you can immediately plug this guy in and he can get you some points. Well, there's a problem with that. Having players like that on your team who are going to get a handful of receptions and mediocre yardage week over week, but have a small defined role in an offense is the quickest way to just squeeze into the playoffs. But you're not going to beat any of those teams that have faced less adversity than you and just basically hit on their draft picks at a better rate or made some good trades along the way. There's always going to be a team that hits on all 4 of their first picks, and that same team oftentimes may even hit on some middle and late round picks as well. So when you're drafting in the later rounds, you really have to shoot for the stars. We don't consider hitting on a late round guy simply meeting his draft day price tag. And if you are thinking that way, you're thinking of it completely wrong. We're talking about players who are ranked as like wide receiver 55. You can't just hit on a guy you drafted at wide receiver 55 and be happy that he finished as wide receiver 55. You literally gain nothing. So for all of us here, for all of you guys watching this video right now, we should never consider hitting on a late round player meeting the actual draft capital you invested in them. Whenever we're in the later rounds, we want to hit on a guy with the ability to be a top 20, top 30 producer. You want him to beat the odds. You want him to show up on this chart next year as one of those guys with a super low success rate that just makes it to be a top 30 producer. And believe us, we do not care if the floor is 0. In fact, having a low floor makes it much easier to drop the player if another player with higher upside is on the waiver wire. Let's say you draft a guy and if he doesn't score for the first few weeks and his involvement in the offense isn't trending upward and you just don't see this pick panning out, drop him. It's really that simple. These players are much easier to drop than the ones that are getting you those 5 to 6 targets a week, putting up those 4 to 8 PPR fantasy points per game. And why is that? It's because for some reason in our heads, we always tell ourselves that player that's putting up 4 to 8 points a week is just going to end up doing better. We just wait for the right matchup. We make up every excuse in the book on why they can improve and that they're already putting up points, which is more than you can say for a lot of those other guys on the waivers. The only problem is, next thing you know, it's week 8. We realize that we have the wide receiver 40 on our team and we've never started him once and we never intend to. Not only that, he has absolutely no trade value, nobody in the league wants him, and he's done absolutely nothing for the team, and for some reason you still just don't want to drop him. Why? Out of fear that somebody else is going to pick him up on waivers and he's going to all of a sudden turn it around and just break out after week 8. It's just unlikely, and these are the types of players we just never want to have on our team. So we're talking about players we don't want on our team. So who do we want on our team? And when it comes to drafting in the later rounds, it's all about expected value. And what I mean by that is we want the potential upside to outweigh the risk of the investment that we're putting into the player. It's as simple as that. Risk versus reward. And it just so happens to turn out that those high upside, low floor players simply have more expected value. So think of it like this. Let's say that you are at a carnival and there's a game that you can play. Let's also say that in this game, there are 10 individual boxes that are out front of you and only 1 out of 10 of the boxes has a prize inside. And in that winning box, there's a crisp $50 bill. All 9 other boxes have absolutely nothing in it. So the objective of the game is to pick one of the 10 boxes and hopefully you choose the box with a $50 bill in it. So like I said, essentially you have a 1 in 10 chance to win $50 and a 90% chance to win absolutely nothing. It sounds like a decent game, right? 1 out of 10 chances. May not be a great game, but what's going to make it a great game is determined on how much it costs to play. So let's say this game cost $1 to play. That's right, $1. So theoretically, you could play this game 10 times and pick 10 different boxes, and the odds are that 1 out of 10 of those times that you play, you will get the $50 bill for the small cost of $10. Now, when I tell you that, you understand that's a very profitable game, and that's exactly what it's like drafting high upside, low floor plays in the later rounds. Most oftentimes than not, you're going to hit on absolutely nothing, but when you do hit, you hit big. And in the later rounds, the investment that you're making in these players in the 10th, 11th, 12th, 13th, 14th round even, the investment is so small, it's almost silly not to take a shot. So that's a clear example of what drafting high upside, low floor players does for your team. Now let's do the same example, but for a safe floor, lower upside player, so the polar opposite. So in the same carnival game with the 10 boxes, yet again, you can only choose one of them for the low cost of $1, but this time, every single box that you pick from has $1 in it. Congratulations, you win every time. The only problem is you win your money back and you aren't going to leave the draft feeling like you won. In fact, after a few weeks, you probably will feel like it was a complete waste. And we promise you that's exactly how you are going to be feeling if you draft players with an extremely low ceiling just because they have a safe role in the offense. And a player that is going to fit this bill right now in 2018, to put it into perspective, is someone like Theo Riddick. Remember, it's not hitting on a player if you draft him as RB45 and he finishes as RB45. Remember though, in the earlier rounds, if you draft a player as wide receiver 10 and he finishes as wide receiver 10, you're stoked. But it's not going to feel like winning if you draft a player ranked as wide receiver 50 and he finishes as wide receiver 50. It's as simple as that. You got to go big or go home. And that's what the later rounds are all about. Don't be afraid to take on a ton of risk and sacrifice any sort of floor just to hit on the potential upside, because nothing feels better than bragging to your friends about this stud that you got due to your own pre-draft research. Now, if you guys do want late round targets, don't forget you can always become a premium member of our website to unlock all our premium rankings on thefantasyfootballadvice.com. As you know, it comes with tier-based rankings, player breakdowns, risk ratings, projected target shares, and more. But I think this is a good time to get into some side-by-side comparisons of two players who are polar opposites when it comes to floor and ceiling that are both being taken in the later rounds. So for this example, we have Sterling Shepard versus Tyler Lockett. I think you all know at this point, but Shepard is the safe floor, low upside type of player, and Lockett is going to be the player with a much higher ceiling, but we've seen throughout his career that he does have a low floor. So let's start with Sterling Shepard. So you have a player who has a defined role in his offense, a role that could garner consistent targets each week. This essentially means that he is going to be a lot easier to predict on how his season is going to pan out, and more importantly, how he's going to perform one week to the next. The only problem is we really can't reasonably predict that he is going to have a high workload this season, which is going to extremely limit the type of upside that he can have. He has a ton of players on that team that are extremely good, and he's going to have major competition for targets between Odell Beckham, Evan Engram, and Saquon Barkley. This team is going to be hard pressed to get someone like Sterling Shepard 8+ targets per game, and for a smaller slot style player, red zone usage is definitely going to be few and far between as well. So what can we reasonably predict for Sterling Shepard? Remember, even when the top two receivers were down last year on the depth chart, when that was Brandon Marshall and also Odell Beckham, were both down with injury, and Sterling Shepard and Evan Engram were the only people there. Shepard not only produced as wide receiver 21 in points per game, which is pretty mediocre compared to his opportunity share in this team being down in all these games, he couldn't even stay healthy and handle the workload and ended up becoming injured. So this season we can easily expect him to be reduced to more of a role player, and there's no way we can expect the same amount of production or players going down with injury this year. So we don't see the upside. Where do you see it? We know he's going to be involved in this team and play a certain role, but how valuable is that? Not really that valuable. Yes, he's going to get a handful of points each week, but there really isn't much room to exceed value, let alone break out into a top 20 player. Now Lockett, on the other hand, he is someone who we will know right away how his target share is going to be distributed. He's slotted in as the second wide receiver on this team that just lost over 200 targets. The same team that has a bad defense and a subpar offensive line. Now, normally a poor offensive line could be a negative for the overall offense and the receivers, but Russell Wilson has an elite level mobility, which is going to allow players like Tyler Lockett to create more on his own and make plays downfield. And I get it, we all know that Lockett underperformed last season, but you have to give him a break because he was coming off of what was one of the most gruesome broken legs that we have seen in recent years. His leg literally snapped in half. Not only that, the coaching staff was very vocal about how he wasn't healthy last season and wasn't able to do as much as he had been, and all the things that really made him special as a player. Word is this season, he's back and he's completely healthy and he's doing the things that really made him special. And this coaching staff has been doing nothing but saying good things about Lockett. And don't forget, Doug Baldwin is also dealing with some knee issues right now. It's listed as soreness and preventative, but it could turn into more or at least give him a slow start to the season, priming Lockett for a very hot start to 2018. And the best part, like I mentioned earlier, is we're going to know right away if he's really involved in this offense, or at least as involved as he should be, considering he's the second wide receiver on a team that's going to be throwing the ball a ton. If it doesn't pan out 2-3 weeks, he has a high of like 4 targets, we can easily move away from him, and we don't have to chase those minimal points that you're going to be getting from a player like Sterling Shepard. And you want to know the craziest part about comparing these two players? There are 3 rounds separating these players in ADP. And would you guys be surprised if I told you that Sterling Shepard was the guy that's being taken 3 rounds earlier? It makes absolutely no sense. So just to give you guys some examples of late round picks that we really like right now that have a pretty low floor, but they also have a pretty high ceiling as well. We just mentioned Tyler Lockett. We also like at the receiver position, Josh Doctson, Anthony Miller, Kenny Golladay, and Tyrell Williams, just to name a few. And for running backs, we really like Corey Clement, Nyheim Hines, Kenneth Dixon, and Giovanni Bernard. Each one of these players has a realistic pathway to becoming a top 20 player. For running backs that are being drafted in the later rounds, most of them are going to end up needing an injury in order to be relevant, but that's okay. We get to a point in the draft where we're really picking between backups and other backups, so all we can do is determine which one of those has the easiest pathway to being an immediate producer. So a better target would be someone who can take over touches without an injury, someone like Kenneth Dixon. You would also get bonus points for any running backs that are used heavily in the red zone, or maybe they're used in the receiving game quite often. So those are just things that you want to look for when determining who is a good late round pick for your team at the running back position. For receivers, on the other hand, you want to target offenses with questionable target market shares. That comes in the form of either a new quarterback or a lot of targets maybe left in free agency. You also want to make sure to look for young players that have shown a lot of promise, even if it's only happened in brief flashes throughout their career. Keep an eye out for those guys that grade well on playerprofiler.com, so those players with a strong athletic ability, and also target guys that have a really good quarterback. Good quarterbacks can move good receivers up the depth chart quickly. A good quarterback isn't always locked in to one main target. He's able to find the guy that's getting open. So those superior athletes, those player profiler guys, those guys are going to shine if they're on a team with a better quarterback. But overall, just look for these players that just have a lot of unknowns and they're highly talented. We get it, the unknowns are scary, they present risk, but that's why these players are going late in drafts. And if you target guys that have a lot of talent, they're really good athletes, your team's overall going to have a lot more upside. Once in a while, when the talent shines through and the unknowns manifest into a positive situation, you end up drafting guys like Marvin Jones and Robbie Anderson last year in the 10th, 11th, 12th round. And if you're able to manage your roster appropriately, you're going to find yourself making it to the championship game more oftentimes than not. Alright everybody, that's going to do it for today's video. We really hope you enjoyed this one. If you did, hit that like button. If you're new to the channel, hit that subscribe button. We thank you all for watching, and we'll catch you on the next one.